The seventh door shut in my face, and I stood in the rain and thanked the woman behind it. She could not hear me. The bolt had already gone home. Through the shutter crack I watched her lift her child off the floor and carry him away from the sound of a stranger, and I did not blame her, and I made myself say the thanks out loud anyway, because I had made a rule that night that I would thank every door that closed. 7. Then, I had walked from the cold gate's shoulder down into Larrow with wet wool on my back and no name on my tongue, and 7 houses had looked at me and seen what they were meant to see. A big man gone ragged, hair to his collar, a beard 3 weeks old, boots ruined, hands empty. A drifter come down off the pass ahead of the snow. In a fat year they might have given me bread at the step. This was not a fat year. The barley had drowned in spring, and the elk had gone north early, and the Emberfold had spent the summer counting what it did not have. I could have named myself at any door and been given a bed, a fire, a roast goose that nobody in Larrow could spare. That was the point of the thing. My grandfather had made the right and my father had walked it, and now it was mine. Before an alpha king of the Emberfold chose a Luna, he was to go out among his own people wearing nothing but his skin and his hunger, and see how they used a nobody. Because a Luna would be chosen out of a hall full of people who knew exactly who he was. Because a crown is a poor instrument for measuring hearts. So the council had told me. The council had also told me, 3 days before I left, that Lady Yvette Callowmere of the River Holds had a good bloodline and a steady hand, and would bring 400 wolves to our banner, and that I was 39 years old, and that the Emberfold had been 41 years without a Luna and 41 years without a fire in its great hearth, and that people were beginning to say the 2 facts were the same fact. I had let old Orties talk. Then I had gone out the postern in a dead man's coat. The rain turned to sleet on the road above Larrow. The road above Larrow goes nowhere but up to the cold gate and through it to the winter country, and this was the last week the pass would be open. I had no business up there. I went up because I had run out of doors going down, and because a man in my mood would rather climb than be seen. Half a mile on there was a light. It sat low and yellow off the left of the road, the way a light sits when it is coming out from under a door that does not fit its frame. Behind it, a long roof, a chimney, a stone wall breaking the wind, a byre. A sign on a post, so weather-eaten I had to stand under it to read it, and what it said was not a name but a fact. The long table, hot food, the pot is on until it. I stood there with sleet running down the back of my neck, and I laughed once for the first time in a month. Then I made myself pitiful, which took no effort at all, and I knocked. The door opened at once. That was the first strange thing. In a famine year on a road going up to a pass, an hour after dark nobody opens at once. She was perhaps 30, not tall, dark hair pulled back hard and coming loose anyway, sleeves shoved past the elbow, forearms like a woman who lifts things all day, an apron with a scorch mark on it the shape of a leaf. She had a wooden ladle in her fist, and she was holding it the way you hold a thing you have forgotten you are holding. She looked at me. She looked at the sleet on my shoulders. She looked longest at my boots, which had come apart at the right toe, and something in her face went from who to ah, and she stepped back and pulled the door wide. "Come in before the heat gets out," she said. "Sit near the fire, not in it, boots off. There's a rack." That was all, no questions, not one. The room was long and low and smelled of wood smoke and thyme and wet dog. A table ran nearly its whole length, hence the sign, with benches worn to a shine along both sides, 30 places, 40. It was empty. Every place was empty. On the table, at intervals, someone had set out spoons, as if for a crowd that had been expected and had not arrived. At the far end, by the hearth, a wolf lay with its chin on its paws. I stopped. My kind know each other. A wolf on a stranger's floor is a message, but this one was no pack wolf. It was a yearling, and it was starving, ribs like fingers under a bad coat, one ear torn to a stub. It lifted its head and looked at me and did not rise, and there was no challenge in it at all, only the flat, patient nothing of an animal that has decided to be alive as long as it can and not to spend anything on opinions. "That's thin mercy," the woman said behind me. "She won't trouble you. She came down off the border in the summer and she's been dying very slowly ever since out of politeness." "Yours?" "Nobody's. That's rather the point of her." I sat where she told me. She hung my coat where it would steam and not scorch. She put a cloth in my hands without comment, and when I had dried my face she took it back and did not look at what the beard had been hiding, which was the jaw of a man who had eaten well his whole life. Perhaps she looked. She said nothing. At the fire there was a pot. It was a great black-bellied thing on a swinging arm, and it had been on that arm so long the arm had bent to it. She swung it out, lifted the lid, and I heard it, that particular low knock of a ladle finding the bottom of a pot too soon. She stood with the lid in one hand and the ladle in the other, her back to me. I have seen men decide whether to charge a shield wall. I have never seen anyone take longer over a decision, or take less time. She swung the pot back, took a bowl down off the shelf, a wide clay bowl with a chip out of the rim, worn white on the inside where 400 spoons had gone round it, and filled it, and scraped, and filled it more, and brought it to me with a heel of black bread balanced on top. Then she went and sat across from me with her hands folded, and nothing in front of her at all. "Eat while it's hot," she said. "It goes to nothing when it's cold, it's mostly barley." I want to tell this part properly, because it is the whole hinge of my life, and I have never once told it right. I have been fed by kings. I have been fed by my own kitchens, by cooks who wept when the sauce broke. I have eaten the roast heart of a stag at the head of my own hall with 300 wolves howling my name until the rafters shook. I put the spoon in my mouth. It was barley, an old carrot, and a bone that had been boiled 3 times, and there was thyme in it, and some green thing pulled up from under snow, and it was hot. And the room went quiet. Not the room, me. Something in me that had been standing up for 39 years, standing up in council and standing up on walls and standing up in the dark when there was no reason left to stand, that thing lay down. It lay down the way an old dog lies down at a fire all at once with a grunt, and it was not asleep, it was only done. There was heat under my breastbone that had not come from the soup and did not move. Not a pull, not a howl, not a hand on my throat. A coal, set down very carefully in a hearth that had been swept and left empty a long time, by someone who was in no hurry, and did not intend to explain herself. I sat with a spoon in my mouth in a stranger's waystation, and I understood, with a clarity that made my ears ring, that if I never rose from that bench again it would be enough, and that the woman across the table had made this happen simply by handing me a bowl, and that she did not know, and that she had no wolf at all. I did not know that last part yet, but I knew there was nothing coming off her, no pack scent, no wolf under the skin, none of that faint animal whether every one of my people carries into a room, only wood smoke and thyme and cold rain in her. "It's good," I said. "It came out wrong. It came out like a man swearing an oath badly." She smiled a little, not at me, at the fire. "It's soup." "You've had none." "I've had plenty of it, I make it." She got up, took the empty pot off the arm before it could scorch, and set it in the basin. "There's water in it now. That'll do for morning." I looked at the bowl in my hands. It was heavy. It was the last of the pot. I had heard it. And the pot was the day's, and the day was over, and there was flour on the shelf but nothing else that I could see, and there was a starving wolf on the floor with its chin on its paws. "You gave me your supper." "I gave you the soup that was in the pot." She said it without turning round. "Don't make it a monument. You'd been walked at 7 doors and you weren't going to make the pass tonight, and if you'd gone back down that road, you'd have slept in Autry's byre with the sleet coming through, and then in the spring I'd have had to be sorry about you. It's cheaper this way." "How do you know it was 7? Now she did turn. She dried her hands on the scorched apron and looked at me for a while. "Because it's Laro," she said, And it's the hungry end of a hungry year, and you look like every man who's ever come up this road after the harvest failed, and I know exactly which of my neighbors will open a door and which will stand behind it and hope. Rannoch will open. He'll give you a hard word and half his bread. Nobody else. Rannoch's out at his sister's. I put down the spoon. You keep count, I said, of who opens. Something crossed her face quick, closed. I keep count of a lot of things, she said. Eat, it's going cold. I ate. She banked the fire and put a stick down for thin mercy that the wolf ignored and then took, and she moved down that long, empty table with a rag, wiping places nobody had used, and I watched her do it and could not for the life of me work out why. When I had scraped the bowl, she took it, looked into it, and gave a short, satisfied nod, as though a suspicion of hers had been confirmed. You've been eating snow, she said, 3 days. 4. Then you'll want the small bed by the chimney and not the loft, because you'll be sick at midnight and I'd rather you didn't do it above my head. She said this pleasantly. There's a bucket. Cost of the bed is nothing tonight because I've nothing to sell you tomorrow. Cost of the soup is your name, and you may lie. I had walked out of my own keep 3 weeks earlier with a false name ready in my mouth. It had sat there all that time, unused, because nobody had asked. Cor, I said. It was not entirely a lie. My mother had called me that until I was 6. Cor, she hung the rag on its nail. I'm Nessa Coyle. This is the long table and it's mine and it's failing, and if you're a thief you'll be disappointed, and if you're a murderer you'll be embarrassed, because the pot's empty and there's only 40 spoons and a wolf that can't stand up. Good night. She went. A door closed at the back of the long room quietly, without a bolt. And I sat there in the firelight with the coal burning under my breastbone and a chipped bowl in front of me. The Alpha King of the Emberfold, master of 9 holds and 11,000 wolves, in a dead man's coat, and I did the sum. 8 doors, 7 closed. The 8th had opened before I'd finished knocking and had fed me the last of the pot and had asked nothing, and had not once, in an hour, looked at my hands to see what I might be worth. The rite was over. It had taken 3 weeks and it had been answered in 3 minutes, and I had my answer, and I had no idea at all what to do with it. I was still sitting there at midnight when the sickness came up, exactly as she had said it would, and I made it to the bucket, and I heard the back door open a hand's width and close again, and in the morning there was water by the bed and a clean cloth and nobody in the room. I meant to go at dawn. I want that on the record, because everything after depends on it. I meant to walk down to Larrow, meet Bram at the Crossroads Shrine where he had orders to wait for me on the 12th day, take back my name, ride to Hearthstone, and tell old Ordies and the whole grey pack of them that I had walked the right as my father walked it, and my answer to their question about Lady Callowmere was no. Instead, I came out into the yard and found Nessa coil up a ladder in the sleet, trying to lift a roof beam back onto its bracket by herself. She had a rope. The rope was doing a third of the work and she was doing the rest and losing. The byre roof had gone at the corner in the night. Under the broken corner stood 4 goats, a mule with an opinion, and about 200 weight of the only hay between here and spring. I looked at that hay for a while. Hold the ladder, she called down, or go away. Both are useful. I did neither. I put my shoulder under the beam and lifted it, and the ladder went one way and she went the other, and I caught her by the back of the apron with one hand, which is an undignified thing to do to a woman you have known 11 hours, and set her on her feet, and shoved the beam up into its bracket with the other hand, and held it there while she stared at me. Peg, I said. She went and got the peg. She drove it in. She came down and stood in front of me in the sleet with the hammer hanging from her fist and looked me up and down the way a farrier looks at a horse. How much of that was you, she said, and how much was the beam being lighter than it looks? The beam is not light. No, she agreed. It isn't. She turned the hammer over. There's no coin here, Cor. I want to be plain about that before you say anything you'd like to be paid for. The long table hasn't taken a copper since midsummer because there's nobody on the road who has one. What there is, a bed by the chimney, whatever's in the pot, and work from before light to after dark for the 6 days until the cold gate shuts. After that, nothing comes over the pass till thaw and you'd be wintering here, and I don't think you'd like it. What work? The roof, the byre wall, 4 cords of wood that are trees, the well chain, and on the 4th day the last caravan comes through from the winter country and there'll be 19 people and 40 animals and they'll want feeding and they'll want it fast, and if I feed them well they'll come back through in the spring and the long table lives another year, and if I don't they won't and it doesn't. She said all this the way a man reads out a butcher's bill. That's the whole of it. There's your reasons to leave. Sleet ran off the end of her nose. She had not slept much. I could see that now. I thought of Bram at the shrine on the 12th day. I thought of the council. I thought of the long grey hall at Hearthstone with the great hearth cold in the middle of it. Cold since I was 6 years old. The long fire that had burned for 9 generations and had gone out the winter my mother died and had never once been coaxed back. Though we had tried everything. Though we had brought priests and flint and pitch and a whole holy fuss up from the river Holds, and though the truth, which I had never said aloud to anyone, was that I had stopped wanting it lit. Because a fire in that hearth would have made the hall look like it was waiting for someone. And I thought 6 days. I'll stay till the pass shuts, I said. She nodded once, as though I had confirmed a suspicion again, and handed me the hammer, and that was the beginning of the best week of my life. I will not pretend it was courtship, it was labor. I split wood until my palms tore and then split more with rags on them, because I had not done a day's honest work with my hands in 20 years, and my hands, which could hold a shield all afternoon, had never once been asked to hold an axe all morning. I dug out the well chain and found the reason it stuck. I rebuilt 11 feet of dry stone wall badly, and she watched me do it and said nothing. And then on the 2nd night she came out with a lantern and took the top course off and did it again in front of me slowly so that I could see. And when I opened my mouth she said, "Watch the stone, not me," and I shut it. Nobody had corrected me since I was 19. My council disagreed with me. My warriors argued with me. Nobody had ever simply reached past me and shown me how a thing was done, without apology, because the thing mattered more than my feelings about it. I found I liked it so much it frightened me. I learned her, the way you learn a country by walking in it. She had a laugh she was embarrassed by, too loud for the room, and she stopped it with the back of her wrist. She talked to the mule at length and to the goats not at all. She could not carry a tune and sang anyway when she thought the wind was covering her. She ate standing up always and always last, and I began to notice how little there was of it, and how much of that little went to thin Mercy, who was, by the 3rd day, standing up in the yard with a piece of the salt bacon in her jaws and her eyes on Nessa like a creditor. And she was wolfless. I had it from her on the 2nd night plainly when I finally asked. Not a servant, not an omega, not anything. Her father had been a hearth keeper. She said it as though it were a trade, like cooper or wheelwright. And her mother had been of the 9-fold hearths, whatever that meant. And there was no wolf in either of them and none in her. And there never had been. And when the coils came up out of the flooded country, 2 generations back the packs at the cold gate had let them keep the way station, and had otherwise looked through them like weather. They send their sons up in the summer to look at me, she said, the way you'd look at a 2-headed calf. They're not cruel, that would be simpler, they're polite. She poured hot water over the last of the time. I've spent 30 years being politely nothing core, and I've made peace with it, and I'll thank you not to be sorry at me. Sorry's no use in a pot. I'm not sorry. You are, your face does a thing. She put the cup in front of me, which meant she had made it for me, which meant she had gone without it. Drink. The heat under my breastbone had not gone out since the first spoonful. It sat there through the days steady, like something banked. I had 39 years of my life in which nothing of the kind had ever happened, and a lifetime of my father's stories about how it happened to him. He claimed the world went white and he heard bells. My father was a liar of great enthusiasm, and I had no name for this. It did not announce itself. It did not seize me. It simply would not go out. When she came into a room, it did not flare. When she left, it did not gutter. It was more terrible than that. It was at rest. Twice I put my hand flat on my own chest to check I was not fevered. And she knew nothing. That was the thing that began to eat me by the fourth day. She knew nothing at all, not the bond, because there was no wolf in her to feel it, not my name, not what I was, sitting at her table with straw in my hair, eating her food. She had opened her door to a nobody and had gone on treating him as one, which was the whole design of my grandfather's right, and every hour of it now sat in my stomach like a stone. I had come out to test my people. Nobody had told me what to do if I passed a test in a woman's kitchen and failed one at the same table. On the third night, I found the ledger. Not by snooping. She sent me for a jar of pickled cabbage on the high shelf, being 3 heads shorter than the shelf, and my hand knocked a book off the boards and it fell open on the flour bin. It was ruled in a fine, cramped, unbeautiful hand. Columns, dates going back years, a name and beside it a mark and beside the mark a word. Autry Fen 3 nights, mended his own boots at my fire and said the soup wanted salt. Dunna hacks and the child 1 night she paid in eggs, would not be argued with. Rannoch brought 2 hares in the black frost, would not stay to eat one. A man off the pass, no name bad cough 6 nights. A man off the pass, no name no cough by then 6 nights. Girl going down to the river holds, would not say why, fed and sent on, if anyone comes asking no. Page after page of it, years of it, everyone who had ever sat at the long table and what they had eaten and what they had given and what they had not been able to give and never, in 300 entries, a debt. Not one line saying owes me. She was not keeping accounts. She was keeping names. And then at the back in the last 20 pages the hand changed. Smaller, faster, winter cold. Dates from this year. From the famine spring, the drowned barley the summer, and not names at all. Gray 1 ear lame behind. Marrowbone plus 2 lb barley. Gray 1 ear brought a smaller one. 2 bones took nothing for herself. 4 now, bones and the last of the peas. 6 barley, am eating less it will do. 9 they came at moonset and lay in the yard and would not come in. I put it out on the flags, slept badly. 11 no more barley, gave them the seed corn. I stood in a cold larder with a jar of cabbage in one hand, and my kingdom's shame in the other. Because I knew those wolves. The Emberfold's border runs along the cold gate, and beyond it there is nothing but the winter country, and every year I sent 30 of my own to hold that line, young ones mostly, the eager ones, and every year they came home lean and boasting. This year the elk had gone north and the barley had drowned, and I had sent them anyway. And I had asked old Ortiz in the spring whether the border ran short, and old Ortiz had gone through his ledgers and said no, my king, the border holds, no losses to report. No losses to report, because 11 of them had gone down a mountain in the dark, one by one, to a wolfless woman's yard, and had been fed on her seed corn and had lived. Thin Mercy on the floor by the fire with her chin on her paws, Gray, 1 ear, lame behind. That's not for reading, Nessa said in the doorway. I did not turn round at once. I could not for a moment arrange my face. You gave them your seed corn, I said. I gave them what was in the bin. She came and took the ledger out of my hand, unhurried, and closed it. Don't tell the pass wardens. They'd have to do something about it, and I don't want them to do something about it. Do what about it? They don't like border wolves coming down to the road. There are rules, and the wolves would be shamed and the wardens would be embarrassed and the whole thing would end with somebody being punished and it wouldn't be the wardens. She put the ledger back on its shelf high, where a woman 3 heads shorter than the shelf had to stand on a stool to reach it, which meant she did that every time, which meant she had done it 11 times that winter. So we say nothing. They come, they eat, they go back up. In the spring, they'll be somebody's proud young warriors again, and nobody will know they spent the black months eating a wolfless woman's seed corn off her flagstones. And that's exactly how it should be, because a thing given isn't given if you make the getting of it a story. She turned around and found me standing very still. "What?" she said. "You'll have no seed corn." "I'll have a caravan on 6th day," she said. "If the roof holds and if the wall holds and if you stop looking at me like that." She went out. I stood in the larder with the cabbage. I had left my keep to find out how my people treated a nobody. I had found, instead, that while I sat in my cold hall with my counselors telling me the border held, a nobody had been holding it. Bram came on the 5th day. I should have expected it. Bram Hollick had been my second for 11 years, and he had a mind like a bailiff and a heart like a bad-tempered ant. And when a king does not come to the crossroads shrine on the 12th day, Bram Hollick does not sit down and wait for the 13th. I was up on the byre roof with a mouthful of nails when I heard them. 8 horses on the Larrow Road, coming fast, and 8 riders who were making no attempt whatever to be quiet. And over it all a voice I had heard bellow across 3 battlefields, shouting a description of a man with a black beard and a bad coat, and asking house by house, all the way up the valley, whether anyone had seen him, and offering silver for the answer. 7 doors. 7 doors that had closed on a beggar, and behind every one of them a person who had watched me stand in their reign, and who could now earn a month's grain by pointing up the hill. I came down off the roof faster than was wise. In the yard Nessa was hauling water, and Thin Mercy was on her feet by the gate with her hackles up and her lip lifted, and beyond the wall the sound of the horses was coming up the last turn. Nessa set down the bucket. She looked at the road. She looked at me, and I watched her take in the way I was standing, which was not the way a drifter stands when soldiers come, and I watched her decide in about the space of one breath not to ask. "Byre," she said, "behind the hay, don't move the mule, he'll tell them." And she picked the bucket back up and walked out to meet 8 armed men alone, with her sleeves shoved past the elbow and nothing in her hands but water. And I stood in the doorway of a byre in a dead man's coat with my own name coming up the road toward me. And I understood that in about 90 seconds I was going to have to choose between the truth and the last 5 days, and that whichever I chose. This woman had just decided to hide a stranger from soldiers on no evidence at all, except that she had fed him. Bram's horse came through the gate. Bram's horse came through the gate, and he was off it before it had stopped, and 8 men fanned out behind him into that little yard like water into a cup. Nessa Coyle set her bucket on the mounting block, straightened, and looked up at him. "There's no room," she said, "for 8 horses. Bram Hollick is a head shorter than I am and twice as loud. He had his sword hand loose and his eyes going over the byre, the roof, the house, the wolf at the gate with her hackles up, and he had the look he gets in a village that is about to be uncooperative. "I'm not here for a bed, mistress. I'm looking for a man. Big, black beard, 3 weeks of it, bad coat, good hands. He came up this road 5-6 days ago. Many men come up this road. Not this year they don't." He put his hand in his purse and brought it out full, and he let the silver talk before he did. 12 marks says you've seen him." I watched her look at the silver. I want to be honest about this, because it is the part I have never told the council, and never will. I watched her look at 12 marks of silver, which was a year of the long table's takings in a good year, which was seed corn, which was a roof, which was the difference between the way station living and the way station dying, and which was being offered to her by a man in mail with 7 armed riders behind him, for the price of 1 sentence about a stranger who had eaten her food and slept by her chimney, and told her a name that was not his. She looked at it for perhaps 3 heartbeats. "Put that away," she said. before somebody sees you waving it about on a hungry road, and take your horses off my herb bed." Bram blinked. Behind him, young Ilric snorted and turned it into a cough. "Mistress, you want to know if I've seen him?" Nessa folded her arms. "Then tell me why you want him and I'll tell you whether I'll answer. That's the price. It's cheaper than 12 marks and you'll find it harder." And Bram Hollick, who has bullied better people than me, opened his mouth to lie to her, and I saw him do it, and I saw him fail, because there is a kind of person you cannot lie to in a farmyard in the rain, and she was standing in front of him with her sleeves rolled. "Because he's mine to guard," Bram said at last roughly, "and I've lost him, and I've been 6 days finding out that 7 houses in Larrow shut their doors on him in the sleet." Something moved across Nessa's face then, not triumph, something more like grief. "7, she said. 7, I have their names." "Yes," she said quietly, "I expect you do." And I came out of the byre. I had made no plan. I had spent 90 seconds behind a haystack composing 3 different speeches, and I dropped every one of them on the straw, because Bram was standing in her yard with a list of names in his fist, and I knew exactly what that list was for, and I knew who it would fall on, and none of them was me. 8 men saw me at once. 8 men went down on one knee in the mud with a sound like a barn door closing, and Bram's sword went back into its scabbard, and his face did something complicated, and he said, "My king," in a voice that was mostly relief and partly murder. Nessa did not move. The rain came down. Thin Mercy at the gate lowered herself very slowly onto her belly with her eyes on me, and then, I have never forgotten it, she got up again and walked to Nessa and stood against her leg. Nessa put her hand down and rested it on the wolf's ruined head. She looked at the kneeling men. She looked at me. I watched her go back through 5 days the way you go back through a ledger, entry by entry. The beam, the wall, the stool she had climbed to put the book back, the cup of time water she had made and gone without, the bucket she had left by the bed at midnight. "Cor," she said. "Corwin," I said, "Corwin Ash." I heard her breathe out. "Ash," she repeated. Not a question. She was not a fool, and she had never been a fool, and the name Ash has been over the Coldgate for 9 generations. "Get up," I said to my men, and they got up. "Bram, outside the wall, all of you now." "My king, we've ridden." "Outside the wall." They went. Bram went last and slowest, and at the gate he stopped and looked back at the woman standing in the yard with her hand on a starving wolf, and whatever he saw there he did not say, and he took the horses off her herb bed on the way out. Then it was the 2 of us and the rain. "Nessa." "Don't." She said it without heat. That was the worst of it. If she had shouted I would have known what to do. I have been shouted at by professionals. "Give me a moment to be stupid, and then I'll be sensible, and then we'll get on." So I stood in the rain and let her be stupid, which took about as long as it takes to lift a bucket. She lifted the bucket. "There's a right," she said, walking past me to the trough. "My father told me about it. The Alpha King goes out in rags before he chooses a Luna, and sees how the small people use a nobody. He used to laugh about it. He said it was the only law in the Emberfold that was made for us, and it was still a law about the king." "Yes." "So you were testing us." She tipped the bucket, and Larrow failed and I passed. "Nessa." "How many marks?" she said, and now finally there was something in her voice. Was I worth? I had my hands open at my sides, which is not a thing an Alpha King ever does. "You are not being tested," I said. "That is what I have to tell you, and it is the only true thing I have. The right ended at your table on the first night. It ended before I had swallowed. What happened after that was not a test. It was a man staying because he could not make himself leave, and letting you go on calling him Cor because the moment he said Corwin, everything he had would be standing between you and him, and I could not bear it. That is not an excuse. It is what it was. I ate 5 days of your food under a false name, because I was a coward about one word." She stood with the empty bucket hanging. You slept in my house, she said. I did. You mended my roof. Badly. You did, she agreed, and her mouth moved and she killed it. You let me correct your wall. I have thought about that every night since. Why? Because nobody has done it in 20 years, I said, and I have needed it every day of them. The rain went on. Out beyond the wall a horse stamped and Bram said something short to somebody. Nessa set the bucket down and pressed the heel of her hand against her eye, once hard, and took it away. Right, she said. Sensible now. Your men will want feeding and I have nothing and you'll go down to Larrow tonight and there'll be a great fuss and she stopped, her jaw set, and you have the names of 7 houses. I do. What will you do to them? And there it was. 5 days I had lived in her house and she had asked me nothing about myself, and the first thing she asked the king was not for her roof, and not for her seed corn, and not for one single thing that could ever be hers. What do you think I should do to them? I said. That isn't fair, I'm not your counsel. No, I said. You are the only person in the Emberfold who has ever fed me for nothing, and I would rather have your answer than theirs. She turned and looked down the hill toward Larrow, where the smoke was going up crooked in the rain from 7 chimneys and 30 more. Dunna Hacks has a child of 2, she said. The boys had a cough since the barley drowned, and she has 14 pounds of oats to see them to spring, and she counts them. If she'd opened her door to a big strange man off the pass with nothing in his hands, she'd have had to choose between feeding you and feeding him, and she'd have fed you, because that's how she's made, and then she'd have lain awake all winter. So she stood behind her door and hoped you'd go. And she has hated herself for it every night since. I'd stake the house on it, because I have seen her face at the well. Nessa. Autry Finn is a coward and always was, and he'll die one. Merrill keeps her mother alive on gruel. Sab has nothing at all and knows it, and a man with nothing doesn't open his door because then everyone knows he has nothing. She turned back to me and her chin was up. 7 doors, Corwin Ash. Not one of them shut on you because they were wicked. They shut because it was the 5th month of a hungry year, and there was nothing behind them to give. And you came to them, wearing the one thing that would guarantee you'd learn nothing at all. And you opened. I had soup, she said. That's the whole of my virtue. I had 1 pot of soup and no child to keep it for. If Dunna Hacks had had my pot, she'd have given you the pot and the bowl and the spoon and walked you to the pass. Your grandfather's right doesn't measure hearts, my king. It measures larders, and in a fat year it would have made saints of Larrow, and in this one it makes 7 criminals, and if you punish them for it. She stopped because her voice had gone. I have stood in the moon court while 11,000 wolves sang my name. I have never in my life been so thoroughly and comprehensively told the truth. Say the rest, I said. If you punish them for it, she said low, then the last thing my father ever loved about the crown is a lie, and I'll have fed you for nothing. The rain thinned. Somewhere down the valley a dog was barking at the horses. Then I will not punish them, I said, and I will not thank them either, because to be thanked by a king for a door that stayed shut would shame them worse. They will never know it was me. Bram will be told the man on the road was a drifter who has been found, and the right is finished not for me, for good. My grandfather's law dies on this hill, and I will stand up in front of the whole moon court and tell them why. And I will tell them that it took me 39 years and a wolfless woman to work out that if you dress a king as a beggar to see who feeds him, all you have learned is who has food. Nessa Coyle looked at me for a long moment with the rain in her eyelashes. That's a very fine speech, she said unsteadily, for a man who owes me 6 days' work and hasn't finished the wall. I did not go down to Larrow that night. I sent Bram down with orders and a lie, and 8 men slept in the byre with the mule, and in the morning I was up on the roof with a mouthful of nails, and my second stood in the yard below and watched his king hammer battens like a hired hand, and said nothing at all for a full quarter of an hour, which for Bram Hollick is a form of screaming. Say it, I called down. The council will hear of it. They will, and you'll tell them yourself, and you'll tell them straight. Tell them what exactly? He spread his hands. That the Alpha King of the Emberfold has spent the week roofing a way station. That he means to sit down to a bowl of barley with a woman who has no wolf, no pack, no blood, and no, he caught himself. No what? Bram set his jaw. He has never lied to me, and it has cost him twice. No standing, he said. Corwin, 400 wolves come with Yvette Calomere. The river holds have wheat and we have none. The Longfire's been out since your mother died, and there are men in that hall who say the Emberfold's luck went out with it. I'm not saying they're right. I'm saying they say it, and when they see who you've— he gestured helplessly at the house, the sign, the mule. They'll say I've lost my mind on a mountain. They'll say worse. I drove the last nail. Then I came down the ladder and stood in front of my second in a dead man's coat. Bram, when you came up that road, how many houses opened? He looked away. None. And this one? At once, he said. The wolf was in the doorway. The pot was on the hook, and she gave you the last of it, didn't she? It was not a question. Bram is a bailiff in his bones. He had seen the pot, and he had seen the empty shelf, and he had done the sum on the ride up the hill, and it had been sitting in him ever since. She gave the last of it to a beggar, and then when I offered her 12 marks, she told me to put it away in case somebody hungry saw it. Yes. Bram Hollick stood in the rain and rubbed his mouth with the back of his hand. Then the council can go hang, he said. Sire. The caravan came on 6th day, as she had said it would. They came over the cold gate at noon with the first true snow on their backs, 19 people, 40 animals, a hack's cousin driving, 3 children asleep in the tilt of the wagon, and every last one of them so far past hungry that they had stopped talking about it. The winter country had had no better year than we had. Nessa had been up since 2 in the morning. She had barley a little, because I had sent Bram down to Lara with silver and orders, and he had come back with what could be bought without emptying the village. She had 2 of my men splitting kindling. She had the great black pot swung out over a fire that had been built to feed 40, and she had thyme and salt and a bone, and about a quarter of what she needed. And she stood in the middle of that long room with a ladle in her fist like a woman looking at a battlefield. It'll be thin, she said. It will be hot, I said. She glanced up at me. Something flickered. Get the door, she said. And Corwin, when they come in, your core, just for today, they'll not eat with a king watching. They'll sit up straight and be careful, and the children won't take seconds. Let them be nobody in my house for 1 hour. It's the only thing I've got that's worth anything. So the Alpha King of the Emberfold spent the last day of the pass carrying bowls. I carried them for 2 hours. I filled cups. I took a sleeping child off a woman's shoulder so she could use both hands, and I stood in the corner holding her while she ate, and she woke and looked up at my beard and decided against fear and went back to sleep. Ilric, who is 19 and had ridden here to save me, mucked out for 40 animals and never once said so. Bram sat at the far end of the long table between a wheelwright and a widow, and argued with them both about the price of iron, and laughed twice. And I watched Nessa Coyle move down that table with the pot. She never once served herself. She gave the thickest of it from the bottom to the driver's cousin who had frost-bitten fingers and could not hold a spoon well, so that she would not have to lift the bowl. She gave the thinnest to the strong. She learned 19 names in an hour and used them, and when they left at dusk to make the last of the descent before dark, she stood at the gate and said every one of them again, and the driver's cousin wept and pretended it was the wind. Then she went in and sat down on the bench and put her head in her hands. They'll come back in the spring, she said. That's the year saved. The pot on the hook was scraped white. The shelf behind it was bare. The seed corn was gone in the black months to 11 border wolves, and there was 1 starving yearling asleep on the flags, and there was no more. Nessa. Don't, she lifted her head. Her eyes were red and perfectly steady. I know what you're going to offer, and I know exactly what it would cost me to take it, and it isn't the wheat, Corwin. If the king's man rides up here with wagons, then everything I've done for 20 years stops being a thing I did and starts being a thing you did, and every man who ever ate here goes away owing you. She pushed her hair out of her face with her wrist. The long table doesn't take, that's all it is. It's the only place on this road where nobody owes anybody anything. Take that away, and there's just a house with a big table in it. And in 3 weeks. In 3 weeks the pass is shut and there's nobody to feed, and I'll eat the goats, she said. And I'll be very rude about it, and in the spring I'll plant what I don't have and something will turn up. It always has. She stood and put the ladle in the basin and stopped with her back to me. Something did turn up, she said. He came up the road with a hole in his boot. I did not touch her. I have thought a great deal about that, and I am still glad of it. Come with me, I said. She turned around. To Hearthstone, I said. Not as anything. Not as a Luna, not as a claim, not as a woman a king brings home. Come as the hearth-keeper's daughter and stand in my hall and tell my council to their faces what you told me in the rain, about larders and hearts. Bram will bring you back before the pass shuts if you want to come back. You may say no to me now and no to me at the door of my own keep, and I will put you on a horse myself. But I am asking. Why? Because for 41 years there has been a cold hearth in the middle of my hall, I said, and I never wanted it lit, because a lit fire looks like it's waiting for somebody, and I would like to stand in that hall once with somebody in it. Nessa Coyle looked at me across the long table with 40 spoons on it. I want my own horse, she said. We rode down out of the cold gate on the last morning, with the snow coming behind us like a door swinging shut. She rode badly and refused help. Thin Mercy trotted at her stirrup for 11 miles and then, at the boundary stone where the border country ends, stopped, and would not come further, and stood in the road looking at us with her ruined ear cocked. And Nessa got down in the mud and knelt in front of a wolf that could kill her and said something to it that I did not hear and got back on her horse and did not look back once. The yearling went up the hill. 10 days later she came down again with the rest of them. But that is the end of this, not the middle. Hearthstone Keep sits above the Cold Gate Road on a black shoulder of rock with the Bell water frozen below it, and it is the ugliest beloved thing in the world. Nessa saw it at dusk and reined in and said, "It looks like a fist," and Bram laughed so hard he had to stop his horse. They were waiting for me in the great hall. Of course they were. Bram's rider had gone ahead, as I had told him to, with instructions to say nothing about anything, which is the surest way in the world to fill a hall. There were perhaps 200 of them. My council on the dais. Old Ortiz at the front with his hands folded, 81 years old, who had held the Emberfold together with string and spite through my father's wars and had taught me to read. The river holds delegation in their good wool. Lady Yvette Calomere, who is a decent woman and did not deserve any of what that evening did to her, standing very straight in green. And in the middle of the floor, ringed in 9 generations of soot-black stone, the long fire, cold. It has an iron hood the size of a cart and a hearthstone you could lay a bull on, and it had been swept clean and swept clean and swept clean since the winter I turned 6. I walked in with a woman in a scorched apron at my shoulder, and 200 people looked at my boots. "Sire," old Ortiz said, "you've been 3 weeks. "I have. And this is Nessa Coyle, of the long table at the Cold Gate. Her father kept a hearth and so does she." I turned and put my back to the cold long fire and my face to the hall. Before anything else, the right of the closed doors is ended. It will not be walked again by any king of the Emberfold. I walked it, I passed it, and it taught me nothing except that I have spent 11 years asking my council the wrong questions. That set them going. It went on for some while, I let it. Old Ortiz raised one hand, and the hall came down. "My king," he said, in the dry voice he uses when he intends to be gentle, which is far worse than the other one. "The right is old, your grandfather." "My grandfather, never walked it in a famine year. Nevertheless, and this, he inclined his head to Nessa courteously, and there was not one grain of cruelty in it, which is why it was so terrible. This woman has done you some kindness on the road, and you are grateful, and gratitude is a virtue in a king. It is not a policy. The Emberfold requires a Luna with wolves behind her and grain behind her, and the hall requires, his eyes went, without meaning to the swept black stone. The hall requires its fire back. Sire, they are the same question. They have been the same question for 41 years. Ordes, I said, in the spring I asked you whether the border ran short. He stopped. You went through the ledgers, I said, and you told me the border holds no losses to report. That was true. It was true, I agreed. 30 of our young ones went up to the Cold Gate line in a year with no elk and no barley, and not one of them died, and not one of them came to us and said we are starving, because they were 19 years old and proud. 11 of them came down off that mountain in the dark instead, to a way station on the road, and lay in the yard at moonset and would not come inside, and a wolfless woman put food out on the flagstones for them all winter and wrote it in a book with no names in it so that nobody would ever be able to shame them for it. She fed them her bread. Then she fed them her peas. Then she fed them her seed corn. She has none left. She did not tell me. I found the book on a flour bin, and she took it out of my hands and told me to say nothing, because the wardens would have had to do something about it, and someone would have been punished, and it would not have been the wardens. The hall had gone very quiet. No losses to report, I said. Ordes, your ledger was honest. It was simply not the ledger that had the truth in it. The truth was in a book on a high shelf, kept by a woman who had to stand on a stool to reach it, and 11 of my wolves are alive this morning because of it, and I did not know, and you did not know. And if I had married 400 wolves and a wagon of wheat, I would still not have known. I turned to look at the cold stone, 41 years of nothing. I do not know how to be a king who knows a thing like that, I said. I have never been one, but I am not going to be the other kind any more. Old Ordes stood there with his hands folded and his mouth slightly open, and I watched 81 years of loyalty rearrange itself behind his eyes, and I loved him very much. And then a voice from the hall, not the council, some young fool at the back with more feeling than sense, and I have never found out who, and I have never tried, called out, "Then let her light the long fire." The hall took it up. That is what halls do. I turned around fast, furious, with my hand up to stop it, because I knew what would come next. I had watched 12 people try it in my lifetime, priests and flintmen, and a woman from the river holds with a phial of sacred oil. And I had watched every one of them fail on that black stone and go away small. And I would not have that done to her, not in front of 200 people, not for anything under the moon. And Nessa Coyle was not listening to me. She had gone to the hearth. She was standing on the swept stone in her scorched apron, looking up into the iron hood with her head on one side, the way she looked at a roof beam, and she reached up and ran 2 fingers along the underside of the hood and brought them down and looked at what was on them. "Corwin," she said, "when did it go out?" "The winter my mother died, 41 years. And nobody's had this hood off since." "No." "Give me a knife," said Nessa Coyle, "and somebody move that bench." She went up on the bench in front of the council of the Emberfold, and she got the point of a knife under the lip of a 9-generation iron hood, and she worked it around the way you work a lid off a jar you have opened 400 times, and 41 years of hardened soot came away in a black sheet and fell on the hearthstone with a sound like a dropped plate. And Nessa said, "There," with enormous satisfaction, and got down and knelt, and put her arm up inside the chimney to the shoulder. Nobody in that hall breathed. "Bird's nest," she said, muffled. "Old one, and your flue's shut. There's a plate up here and it's rusted across, and I'd say it was shut the year the fire went out, by somebody who didn't want the rain coming down on a cold hearth, and then that somebody died or forgot, and nobody after them ever thought to look, because who looks up a chimney nobody uses." Her voice went tight and she pulled and something gave, and a river of black came down over her arm and her shoulder and her hair. There. Now. Kindling, small. And I want dry beach if there's any in this fist of a house, and no oil, and nobody is to help me, because you've all been helping for 41 years. They brought her kindling. Old Ortiz brought it himself in his good wool, and he did not say one word. She built it the way she built everything, fast, unfussy, unbeautiful, correct. A little house of splinters and a bird's nest under it. She struck flint. It caught at once because it was always going to catch at once because the flue was open. And then Nessa sat back on her heels on the hearthstone of Hearthstone Keep with soot to her elbows and her father's trade in her hands. And the long fear of the Emberfold took hold of the beach and stood up, gold, in the middle of my hall. The heat came out across that floor and hit 200 people who had never once in their lives felt it, and I heard the sound they made. I will not tell you it was silent. It was not. Somewhere behind me, a woman began to cry the way you cry when you are angry about it. Lady Yvette Calomere put both hands over her mouth. Bram Hollick, who has stood in a shield wall with a broken arm, sat down on a bench like a man whose legs had gone. And old Ortiz, 81, walked to the edge of the light and stood in it with his eyes shut. It was the flu, he said to nobody. 41 years it was the flu. Nessa stood up and wiped her hands on her apron and looked at the fire with her head on one side, the way you look at a thing you have fixed and are already suspicious of. It'll want watching for a day, she told the hall. It's been damp up there, and somebody should have swept it in the autumn. Somebody should sweep it every autumn. She glanced around at 200 silent faces and her chin went up in that way I had learned in 6 days. That's not a miracle, that's a chimney. There was a noise in the hall, then that I have heard 3 times in my life, and hope to hear once more before I die. She turned to find me. Soot on her cheek, one sleeve black to the shoulder, no wolf in her at all. Corwin Ash, she said, low under the noise, I've a bone to pick with your whole kingdom. 41 years and not one of you thought to look up. And the coal that had been sitting quiet under my breastbone since the first spoonful of barley soup in a stranger's kitchen did not flare, and did not sing, and did not do a single one of the things my father lied about. It simply banked itself down, the way a fire does when it has decided to be a fire all night. They did not make her Luna that evening. I want that understood. I sent the hall to its supper. I walked old Ortiz to his own door with my hand under his elbow because his knees were gone, and at the door he stopped and said, My king, I have served this hall since before you were born, and I would have gone to my grave believing it was the luck. And I said, Ortiz, so would I. And he laughed until he coughed, and then he said, the Calomere match. And I said, no, and he said, no, and went in. He kept his seat on my council. He sits on it still. And he is still the only man alive who tells me I am wrong before I have finished the sentence, and I would not trade him for 400 wolves. Lady Yvette Calomere, I went to myself that night, because she deserved to hear it from me in standing up. She heard me out with her hands folded, and then she said, My lord, I have been in this hall for 4 days, and I have watched you look at that cold stone like a man looking at a grave. And this evening I watched you look at a woman with soot on her face, and I am not a fool, and I am not in love with you, and I would very much like to go home. I gave her an escort of 30 and a letter to her father that took me 4 hours to write. Her holds send us wheat in bad years. She married a shipwright and named her second son Corwin, which I find I cannot think about for very long. And Nessa Coyle stayed 11 days at Hearthstone, in her own room, with the door on her side, and swept every chimney in the keep, because she said the kitchen one was worse than the halls, and it was, and argued with my cooks, and would not sit at the high table, and did sit on the hearthstone in the evenings with her back against the warm iron hood, and let me sit on the floor beside her like a boy, and told me about her father. On the 11th day I asked her to marry me, in a corridor, badly, with my hands full of a chimney brush I had been carrying for her because she would not give it up. She said no. She said, Not while there's a hungry road and no seed corn on it and my house standing empty with the pot cold. You've a hall full of people who'd say I'd got what I came for, and there's nothing in this world I want less than to be a story about a woman who got what she came for. Also, you asked me in a corridor. So I went back with her over the cold gate before the snow closed it, and I wintered at the long table. The Alpha King of the Emberfold, 3 months, in a way station with 4 goats and a mule. Bram nearly died of it. He came up twice with the council's letters and went away with mine, and the second time he stayed a week and split wood and did not once complain, and on the last morning he told Nessa in his bailiff's voice that in his professional opinion the roof was better than it had been and the wall was still a disgrace, and she said, "That's his," and Bram said, "I know. I can tell," and rode off with his shoulders shaking. We ate the goats. She was very rude about it. 11 border wolves came down through the black months, 1 and 2 at a time, and lay in the yard at moonset, and would not come inside, and I put the food out on the flags myself, and did not tell a single one of them who I was, and Nessa stood in the doorway behind me with her arms folded and let me. Thin Mercy came in and slept by the fire and was not thin by first thaw, and was not, strictly speaking, anybody's. In the spring I did not send wagons. I sent, instead, a law, that the Coldgate wardens would provision the border line properly out of the Crown's own granary before the Crown fed anybody in this hall, and that any wolf on any border who is hungry may say so to his king without shame, and that the ledger of that provision would be read out loud in the Moon Court every autumn by the youngest warden present, so that no man of 81 with good handwriting would ever again be the last word on whether my people were starving. They call it the Coil Law. She hates that. She says it should be called the Chimney Law because the point of it is that somebody has to look up. And I married her on the road outside her own gate in the second week of first thaw, with 19 people from a caravan standing in the mud, and Bram Hollick weeping openly, and Rannoch, who opens his door, who has always opened his door, giving her away because her father was dead, and Autry Fenn and Dunna Hacks and Marrow and Sab and the others down from Larrow, who never learned and will never learn that the man they left in the sleet had a crown in a box at Hearthstone. She is Luna of the Emberfold, the hall bows. She has never once got used to it, and I hope she never does. But that is not the thing I keep. The thing I keep is a 3rd-month evening, a year after, when the pass had opened, and a man came up the road with nothing, and my wife, Luna of 9 holds, whose fire burns in the middle of my hall and has not gone out since, took a chipped clay bowl down from the shelf and filled it and gave it to him and asked him nothing at all, and then came and stood in the doorway beside me while he ate. I said, "Do you remember what you told me that night about the cost of the soup?" Nessa leaned her shoulder against mine and watched the stranger eat. "I said the cost was your name," she said, "and that you might lie. You knew I was lying." "Corwin," she said, "everyone lies at that table, that's what it's for." She yawned and pushed her hair back with her wrist and left soot on her forehead because she had been up the kitchen chimney again. "The pot's on, that's all. The pot's on until it isn't." And she went in to see about the fire.